Tanya for the 16th of Shevat is in Perek Chav Dalet, chapter 24, on page 60. The number at the bottom of the page is 104. We're towards the bottom of the page, approximately 6 lines from the bottom, 7 lines. The line begins Urem Mosim. The Alter Rebbe is saying that every Aveda, even the slightest Aveda, is equal to Aveda Zarah, and even worse than the Klipa that is compared to Aveda Zarah, that is called Aveda Zarah. Now the Alter Rebbe will explain what about the fact that every other sin you're allowed to commit and not die for it, whereas Aveda Zarah you have to die and not commit the sin. And the fact that saving a life overrides all other sins other than Aveda Zarah. Also there is the din that says that you should violate the sin and not be killed, which seems to imply that other sins are not as severe, not as serious as Aveda Zarah. So the Alter Rebbe shows how that is not to be taken as an indication of a difference between the sins, but these distinctions that are made are all Gzeiras HaKosuv. They are divine decree, and there is no logic and there is no reason that one sin we should die for, another sin you should not die for. Only these details are equally part of the mitzvah, part of the commandment, and just as we don't understand the commandment itself, we don't understand the details of the commandment. Let's see how the Rebbe says it. Hainu, what this means is, Pirish Chazal, as the sages explain, Omra Teira Chalil Olav Shabbos Achas Kadei Sheyish Meshabos is Harbe V'lei Mishum Kalus HaAvedes V'chumran. The Gemara says that you violate Shabbos in order to save a life, because by saving that life, the person will then be able to observe many Shabbosim. So we are violating one Shabbos for the sake of many Shabbosim. So it's not that life takes precedence over Shabbos, only Shabbos itself takes precedence over Shabbos. 3 Shabbosim, many Shabbosim is greater than one Shabbos, and therefore save the life this Shabbos, violate this Shabbos to save the life, so that there will be many more Shabbosim. So it is the importance of Shabbos that overrules the prohibition of Shabbos that allows the person to save a life on Shabbos. And therefore, it is not more important or less important. One sin is not greater or lesser than any other. Teda, what is the proof? Shaharei Shabbos Chamuro Shkula Kaved Zarah. We We that Shabbos is equally severe with idolatry. Le'inyan shchitas muma ledavar echad. In Yeda Deya Simon Beis, we find that if a person wants to, that in order to be worthy or fit to shecht and to produce a kosher animal, kosher meat, if a person is a transgressor, a willful transgressor of one sin, he denies one particular commandment in Torah, then he is not fit to be a sheichet. Whereas, if a person is a mumar, he denies the commandment against adultery, that is his heresy, then he is not unfit to be a sheichet. So we see here a strange contradiction. If a person's heresy consists of violating Shabbos, of desecrating Shabbos, then he is equal to the person whose heresy is idolatry. They are both unfit to be a sheichet. But if a person's heresy is adultery, or even incest, then his shchita is still kosher. It doesn't disqualify him from being a sheichet. So in this sense, Shabbos is more severe In this case, Shabbos is more severe than adultery, than incest. And yet, on the other hand, we find that you're allowed to transgress and desecrate Shabbos in order to save a life, but you are not allowed to commit adultery or incest in order to save a life. So is Shabbos more severe or less severe than adultery, for example? So we can't tell. Elo t'gzeiras hakosufu. It is a decree of Torah, and it can't be used, the argument can't be made that one is less important than the other. Elo shela'achar ma'aseh hachet, only after the sin. Im hi me'avei she'im behem karasun misa b'dei shamayim, if it's a kind of a sin for which there is no death penalty or karas from heaven, she'ein nafshe olikis meisa legamri v'nechreses misharsha belikim chayim, where the godly soul is not cut off completely. It doesn't die and is not cut off from its source. Rak sheniv gam k'tzas dvei kusa v'achizosa b'sharsha b'chet zeh. What happens, rather, is that it is slightly severed. There is some weakening of its bond and of its tie to its source as a result of this sin, but not completely severed. And the Rebbe says in the note, and depending on the varying degrees of this weakening of the connection between the soul with its source, depending on that, on the degree of the damage, there will also be a variety of punishments, the means by which it is cleansed. It will either be in Gehenna or it will be punished in this world. For every sin, for every transgression, a different kind of punishment, in order to wash away and to remove the stain and the blemish. And even in those sins where there is a death penalty, even there, not all blemishes, not all damages are equal. Even there are different degrees of damage. So as a result, going back to the text, as a result of this sin, the animal soul also, that is clothed in his body, and also his body, the body itself, will return and rise from this unholiness, and become closer to the holiness of the godly soul, that is clothed within them, which believes in the oneness of God, the godly soul does. And even while the person was sinning, the godly soul remained loyal to God. Only it was in exile, literally captive within the animal soul, that comes misitra achra hamachtiya es haguf umeridose ima beimke she'el lamata mata. This animal soul that comes from klipa and that causes the person to sin and drags the godly soul down into the depths of unholiness, tachas tumas asita achra v'klipas aveda zarav Hashem yishmerenu, to a lower level than the klipa itself, and the klipa itself is called aveda zara, and this is even lower. Ein lach golus gadol mizeh meigra rama, etc. There is no greater exile, no greater imprisonment or degradation than the neshama that comes from the highest of the high levels in heaven, to be dragged down to a place that is even lower than aveda zara. U'kameshikosav le'il, t'sheirish u'moke nafshe, kol beis Yisrael, nafshe is kol beis Yisrael, hu mechachma ilah. And as was explained earlier, that the source and the root of every godly soul, of every Jew, comes from the divine chachma. V'hu yizbarich v'chachmasei echad, and God and his chachma are one. So that the neshama literally comes from being one with God and is dragged down into this level that is lower than klipa, lower than aveda zara. What this can be compared to a person who grasps the head of a king, And he forces the king's head down into filth. And there's no greater insult, there's no greater violation than this. Even if it's only temporary, even if it's only momentary, because klipa is called filth, as is known, and to drag the godly soul down into this filth is equal to dragging God himself into the Aveda, into the klipa. In Hayom Yom for the 16th of Shevat, the Rebbe writes that my father said, the Rebbe Rashab said, that the separation, the line between indifference and kvira, apikorsus, is a very, very thin line. It says, Hashem elikecha eish eichlahu. God, your God, is like a fire. Elikus is a flaming fire. When you learn and you daven, it should be done with intensity and with the heat of the heart, so that all the bones, the entire body, is involved and is saying the words of God in the davening and in the learning.